All right, so welcome everyone to the Moosehide campaign launch here at Ontario Tech. My name is Akeisha Laurie. I use she and her pronouns, and I am the Equity and Inclusivity Advisor here in Student Life.
Nani, everyone, thank you for joining. My name is Jill Treen Reber. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the institution's Human Rights Specialist in Gender-Based Violence based out of the Human Rights Office. Thank you for coming. So before we get into our guest speaker today, we like to begin all of our presentations off in a good way. And by doing so, we'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. So Ontario Tech University acknowledges the lands and peoples of the Mississauga of Scugog Island First Nation. We are thankful to be welcomed on these lands in friendship. The lands we are situated on are covered under the Williams Treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga, a greater branch of the Anishinaabe Nation, including Algonquin, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. These lands remain home to a number of Indigenous nations and people. We acknowledge this land out of respect for the Indigenous nations who have created and cared for Turtle Island, also known as North America, from before the arrival of settler peoples until today. Most importantly, we remember the history of these lands has been tainted by poor treatment and a lack of friendship with our First Nations, who they call home. This history is something that we are all affected by, as we are all treaty people in Canada. We all have a shared history to reflect on, and each of us is affected by this history in different ways. Our past defines our present, but if we move forward as friends and allies, then it does not have to define our future. We would encourage you, if you're interested in learning more about the land acknowledgement, please visit ontariotechu.ca/indigenous. So like Akeisha had mentioned, this is the beginning of our Moosehide campaign launch. So we wanted to provide you folks on the call today with a little information about what the Moosehide campaign is, and our wonderful guest speaker, Sage, will be speaking about this more in detail. So the Moosehide campaign is an Indigenous-led grassroots movement of men, boys, and Canadians standing up to end violence against women and children. The inspiration for this campaign came from two co-founders, Paul and his daughter Raven, in 2011, when they were hunting together on their traditional carrier territory. They were close to the Highway of Tears in northern British Columbia, where so many women, particularly Indigenous women, have gone missing or been murdered. Reflecting on the sorrow of the setting, they brought down a moose that would help feed the family for the winter and decided to use its hide to create the very first moose hide pins. Since then, the campaign has grown into a recognized nationwide anti-violent movement with thousands of participating communities, schools, and organizations. To date, over 2 million moose hide pins have been distributed in Canada and across Turtle Island. This campaign is rooted and is guided by Indigenous cultural teachings. It suggests other ways of thinking about masculinity, gender roles, and relationships, as well as our path to healing. Moose hide pins are gifted to everybody and anyone as an Indigenous medicine to help address deep social illness impacting all of us as Canadians. Their work also highlights the disproportionate impact that violence is having on Indigenous women and children, and the explicit racism at the root of this. This campaign is a practical way for Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians to come together to solve a crisis and take steps towards reconciliation. So today we wanted to highlight that if you do have questions about the Moosehide campaign, or furthermore, if you do have questions you'd like us to ask Sage, Akeisha and I will kind of be moderating today. So we ask that you do submit any of your questions to the following link online, studentlife.ontariotechu.ca/moosehide. So once you click on the submission form under the Ontario Tech Informational Webinar May 2nd event subheading. From there, we will direct these questions to Sage or be able to answer them later on in the event. We will be hosting all of the questions at the end. We'll be answering them towards the end of the.
All right, so after that lovely welcome from Jill, thank you so much for that. I'd like to have this opportunity to introduce Sage. So Sage Lacerte, Carrier Nation, is the National Youth Ambassador of the Moosehide Campaign. The Moosehide Campaign, as Jill said, is a grassroots movement that works to end violence against against women and children by engaging men and boys in critical discussion and action surrounding gender-based violence. Sage focuses on engaging young people and students in conversations surrounding gender-based violence, Indigenous feminism, and cultural resurgent action after completing a bachelor's degree at the University of Victoria in the Department of Gender Studies. In 2018, Sage founded the Sage Initiative, an impact investment collective for Indigenous women between the ages of 18 to 24 who are interested in social impact economics. And so on that, I'd like to introduce Sage.
Masicho, Hadi, Sage Lacerte, Sadnir, Teres Natalia, Lekwongan Keo, Loretta Madam Slew, Paul Lacerte Spa, Saikrana Lashabu Injan, Yinkaktane Keo. So hello everyone, my name is Sage Lacerte, she, her. I just introduced myself in my language, the carrier language, and acknowledged my mom, the late Loretta Madam, and my dad, Paul Lacerte, who, as Jill mentioned, is the co-founder of the Moose Hide campaign. And we come from the carrier territory, which is in north central BC, and have a long-standing international relationship between here, Lekwongan territory, which is now colonially known as Victoria, and back home, where my mom and my dad are from, which is Natli Waten First Nation and Lake Babine Nation. They're both located along Highway 16, just north of Prince George. And so just wanted to open this circle in a really good way today and say thank you so much to Keisha and Jill for having me and for offering me the space and voice in this room to share a little bit about my family story and something that might feel quite relatable to many people in the room, considering how often women and children experience instances of violence. It's not uncommon for many people who we speak to have been touched by violence themselves, or for someone they know to have been touched by violence. And so just wanting to open this conversation in a really gentle way, and to say that really a part of the reason why the campaign was brought about was to make these conversations less uncomfortable and more familiar, and to have people discuss their experiences more and be willing to share things that have previously been considered a little bit vulnerable and things that can be kind of touchy. And we just really want to ask people to be more willing to take these conversations out of the darkness, because violence really thrives in the darkness. So the Moose Hide campaign is, as Jill said, Indigenous-led grassroots movement, and we work to end violence towards women and children in Canada. That being said, I think we all have a common understanding that gender-based violence is so intersectional, and the nature of wanting to ensure the women and children, and for me, Indigenous women in particular, was one of the reasons why we were motivated to start the campaign, is because of the severe heightened levels of risk that Indigenous women and various other minority groups in Canada, that we see heightened levels of risk. And so just kind of opening a conversation from that space, knowing that there's room for every single person in Canada in this movement, and it will take every single one of us to create the discursive shift that we're looking for, a cultural shift, and also to have people take action personally and also form mutual accountabilities with their friends and colleagues and family members to ensure that we're all coming from that love ethic. And love ethic really just discusses the importance of operating from a place of love, respect, trust, and being able to show up for the ones that you love in a really good way. So that's how I'll just open our conversation. I'm going to tell you a few stories, and some of them come from my family, and some of them have really blossomed over the past 11 years since we founded the campaign. And of course, I just, again, want to mention that there will be mentions of experiences of violence, not directly, but throughout this conversation. So I'll mention before, just for the sake of if you want to take a moment for yourself and to walk gently throughout this conversation. There's a few things that I want to make sure that we talk about, and I'm really happy to share. One of them is I want to call, I mentioned my mom, I mentioned my dad, Paul Lacerte. The co-founder alongside my dad, Paul, is my sister, my big sister, Raven Lacerte. And I just want to call her into the space today and share that she is on mat leave and has recently welcomed in another little one into the Lacerte family, who is only 4 weeks old. So just wanting to call her into the space and say that many of these stories come from her, our matriarch, and from her leadership across Canada, here in Victoria, and has been recognized globally as a result of the work that she started from that very first moose that Joe mentioned. And it's not a surprise to say that because we grew up away from our territory and because we're visibly Indigenous people, women, that we experience some instances of racism and sexism throughout our time in our education in K-12 and on into post-secondary. And now, having been with the campaign, in my role here, working specifically in post-secondary institutions for the past 3 years, we know that the rates of violence, particularly sexualized violence towards female students, is very high. At least 1 in 3 reported experience sexualized violence by the time they graduate. And so wanting to make that special place for the love ethic that I was referring to has been so important to me and my sister as we went through our school journey, and really just reflecting on how much my dad had been involved in that. He really raised us, and he came from a very small town in north central BC, and he has 5 daughters and 1 son. And so knowing that he wanted to do everything he possibly could to protect us and to make sure that we felt secure and safe and loved and respected and were treated with a sense of integrity by our community members was very important. Knowing that many of his peers, his siblings, his parents had attended residential school, and even he himself and my mom both attended residential schools and church-run day schools in the 80s. And so just needing to call on the importance of that love ethic and that respect towards especially our young ones and our children was so important to him. So we did a lot of work to give us some of those cultural teachings that really did the reverse of what residential schools were supposed to do. So what it was supposed to do was to eliminate intergenerational knowledge transfer. So grandparents, parents would not be able to share some of those cultural teachings, some of those family histories, your language, your relationship to land. And also, it was really meant to have folks experience dysfunction in their relationships and how they see their security and their community thrive and grow. And so he wanted to find a way to replace that trauma again with that love ethic and that sense of community and accountability. So when he had been working in the Friendship Center movement and attended a gender-based violence conference in Vancouver around 2010, he walked into this room. There was hundreds of people there, 250 people at this conference. And he was so happy to have been invited and to be included in the conversation. And he felt like he really wanted to make a difference and to create a plan that felt very actionable. It felt very pressing because, especially in British Columbia, we see heightened risk of violence towards Indigenous women, and we see that along Highway 16, which is now commonly known as the Highway of Tears, as a result of dozens of women having gone missing and been murdered. And that number is in the thousands across Canada. And so wanting to find a space where we could be more actionable felt really important to him. And when he walked in that room, I think he was frustrated and he felt disappointed because there were only 4 men in the room. And out of these 250 people working tirelessly and often in a space where it has been left to women to define solutions in gender-based violence spaces for a very long time. And it frustrated him. He just said, I don't understand. I don't understand why there aren't more men in the room. I know that there's a place for all of us here, and I know that allyship can show up in different ways. But the fact that there are 250 people here and there are only 4 men is very, very frustrating and disappointing. And I want to find a way to call men into this room, not to call them out and say, hey, like, you need to do better, but to say, hey, we want to open up this circle and to ask more men and boys to be a part of this solution-oriented space, and to be able to do the work both at an individual level, at that larger community and organization level, and even all the way up to the governance and nationhood level, like how we want to behave as a Canadian society. And it will take the men and boys, because we know that the men and boys are most often the perpetrators of violence towards women and children. And we also know that it's most often someone that is known to you. So someone who is a peer or a family member or a community member or someone senior to you. And so starting the process of breaking down some of those power asymmetries felt very important to him. And so he took that lesson home of saying, okay, so I know what the problem is. I know what my theory of change is, meaning what is the thing that I want to have an effect on, and what is my solution? What are the inputs, the things that I can do and ask others to do that will result in less women and children being harmed in this country? So he brought some of those initial visions forward, and he went back home to our territory. We always go home to the Carrier territory in the summer and into the fall, and we do our harvesting, and we pick huckleberries, and we go and we fish for salmon, and we do our moose hunting. And so he brought us home, and he always teaches us different lessons on our way home. We're learning our language. We know our way around the territory very well. And we've been hunting since we were in car seats, since we were babies, in our hunting truck. And he would give us more and more responsibilities each time we would go. So when we were very tiny, obviously we would just observe and we were witnesses. And then as we got older, we would gain more responsibilities, start holding a flashlight for him and learning how to do the gutting and how to carry out the meat from the bush, and how to support when there were different pieces and tasks that he needed us to do. And now that we're grown, we've gotten to the point where we can do it on our own without him if we needed to. And so just having that intergenerational knowledge has been such a site of wealth for our family. And not wealth meaning like monetary gain, like wealth meaning we're rich in culture. And so having had him take us out and get to the point where my sister was 16 at the time, and they went out on their own early in the morning, and moose are nocturnal, so you would have to go very, very early. And they were driving along, and I'll just mention something that we learned from the RCMP, which is that in the MMIWG inquiry, and years prior to the inquiry and the report, we know that especially along Highway 16, where our territory is, if you are a hunter or if you do work along logging roads, the RCMP does offer some training about how to identify things that might, things like human remains or clothing, things that you might find from missing and murdered relatives of ours who are on the territory. And so he taught my sister that when she was 16 and they were out hunting in the morning, and she felt very struck by that as a result of her own identity, the way she looks, her age, and her proximity to her home territory, that she's at a much heightened risk of losing her life, to the extent that Indigenous women are 12 times more likely than other women in Canada to go missing or be murdered, and 16 times more likely than white women to go missing or be murdered. And so having heard that and being blessed with a moose and that land medicine, and always knowing that we could go back to those sites to practice our ceremonies, to do fasting, to do hunting, all of these things we can always go back to. And she said, I'm so tired of having to beg people for my life. I'm so tired of having to hear about all of our sisters and our relatives who have lost their lives as a result of this violence. And there's something that we can do about it. And even reflecting back on that conference that was addressing gender-based violence, there were women organizations there who are service providers, and both my sister and my dad identified a space and a theory of change that puts the onus more so on men and boys, asking them to speak up and to stand up and to be more a part of that solution space. And also to not necessarily enter in the women serving space. This is an awareness campaign for the sake of asking people to discuss what it looks like to end violence, asking people to make those affirmations to themselves and to their family members and their community and say, when I put this on, I commit to not harm the women and children in my life. And when I see others wearing it, that is what my expectations are of that person. And it's not a badge of honor to wear this. This isn't something that I wish to have to wear. It's not something that you can practice virtue signaling. This isn't a pin like you might see of other movements that can really be a bit more surrounding your identity or a particular group you belong to. This pin really symbolizes a national crisis that is causing thousands of people to lose their lives. and to have for their quality of life, to be constantly questioned and to live a life where we are fearful. And so I think it's important to think of this as a way that we can use it as a bridging mechanism and a way to start conversations, but also to signal some form of safety with one another. I've seen young men in post-secondary institutions wearing moose hide pins. I went to the University of Victoria, and some folks chose to wear the pin, and we ask everyone to wear the pin. Any member of Canadian society, we encourage to wear the pin, and they're totally free on our website, moosehidecampaign.ca. There's an order pins button at the top of the homepage, and you can order as many as you'd like, and we'll send them to your doorstep by mail, totally for free. We want to make sure that there are as little barriers as possible to being able to wear and share the pin, knowing that we've done quite a bit of impact measurement research, and what we've found with reciprocal consulting, 5 Indigenous women with their PhDs, more PhDs than you would see some Indigenous faculty at an entire institution, is that each pin generates at least 5 conversations, and pins that are worn every day or that folks make sure to clip onto their backpack and their jacket and their most commonly worn suit or things like that. They generate 10 conversations at least. And so knowing that we're creating that discursive shift by taking home those pins that Jill had mentioned and cutting it up at our dining room table in our kitchen. When my sister was 16 years old, I was 14. My dad gave us some kitchen scissors. They probably were about this big when we very first started. And we wrote on these index cards, and it says, "This is the Moose Hide campaign. If you wear this pin, you promise not to harm women and children in your life, to be personally accountable, mutually accountable, and to renew this commitment every year." And so just asking folks to be able to join us in that way. And so we handed out 25,000. And this is in 2011, when there was only like 20 people that would come join us at our gatherings on Moose Hide Campaign Day here in Victoria. And then eventually, when we say that Moose Hide is Raven's first child. And when Moose Hide grew up a little bit, like when it started getting older and kind of growing legs of its own, we would have a national Moose Hide Campaign Day in Ottawa every year as well. And now, because of the global pandemic, we have made sure to shift our practices to keep our community members safe. But I think the nature of asking folks to come and then every year seeing 3 times what we saw the previous year shows how much people are committed and how much there's a demand for folks to really take on this pledge and stand with us. I'll just, take a moment to invite you to, I'm sure throughout this conversation you thought about them, but just to think about one of the people that you love so fiercely and that you would do anything for, and you show respect and love to them, and you would like to be able to do whatever you can in your everyday life. Something as small as putting this patch of moose hide on and being willing to become a champion in your community or in your workplace, in order to ensure that we're creating that discursive shift, that cultural shift. Just inviting those folks into the room. I always kind of give them like a Care Bear stare and just think about them and think about how much I love them. I think about my little niece, Chasyaz, that my sister just brought me, and she has her first daughter's name is Cedar Sus, and in our language that means cedar bear. And having 2 nieces now that I feel fiercely protective of. It makes me want to commit even more. And my sister always said, like, if I had to go door knocking and knock on every single person's door in Canada until we were able to talk it out and discuss why this harm is still happening, especially behind those closed doors at home, and maybe take that flashlight that we were using when we were hunting and shine it into the shadow and into the darkness where violence often thrives, is an area that we chose to commit to. This past week, I traveled to Winnipeg and had the honor of gifting the 3 millionth piece of moose hide to the Honorable Murray Sinclair. And he will be joining us on Moose Hide Campaign Day, which is May 12th this year, and offering a keynote as one of the chief commissioners of the TRC, our uncle, and someone that is highly regarded in the Indigenous human rights and advocacy space in Canada and across Turtle Island. Knowing that we started by handing out 25,000 in 2011, and now having gifted the 3 millionth piece of moose hide this year brings me so much hope and certainty that this work has been really meaningful, and raising awareness and creating conversations really affirms those commitments that we just made for that person that we just thought of. Being willing to come and practice fasting and ceremony with us on May 12th feels so important. And it's our goal to gift 10 million pieces, knowing that there's the potential of each of those 10 million pieces of moose hide generating 10 conversations. We've only just started, and we know you must be patient. And in comparison, earlier I referenced how the intergenerational knowledge was attempted to be removed through the residential school system. And the residential schools were open for 100 years. So having those ties attempted to be severed for so long, we recognize how long it takes to mend and to heal those ties. And really it starts with some of those intergenerational learnings, but also the work that we do with our young ones. We reach every area of society in Canada: education, K through 12, post-secondary, all levels of government, faith-based groups, First Nations communities. We engage with the RCMP. I think it's really important to note that it will take every single one of us to spread awareness and spread this message and create this movement. I want to create space for some questions, and maybe in those questions I'll address the fasting piece and some of the things that you can look forward to on the day with us on May 12th. But I want to create some space and some silence for any questions folks have for me, or any comments, really. If there's things that came up, or questions and curiosities that have come up throughout our conversation, I will leave my email with the team here. And if anybody has any questions or comments that they'd like to share after privately, you can send them to me, Sage Lacerte at moosehidecampaign.ca, or on across social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at Moose Hide Campaign, and it'll likely be me answering, so you'll probably hear back from me pretty soon if you have questions outside of this room.
Thank you, Sage. So as previously mentioned, folks, if you do have questions, please do submit them to our online link there that's listed on the slide, I will, between Akeisha and I, will be monitoring to see, seeing them kind of as they roll in. And Sage, if we do receive some questions, we will definitely
Cool.
direct your way. Thank you.
Yeah, I might just share a little bit about the day because it's something that has really formed how it's one of the two ways that we've determined is our theory of change. The two interventions, one is wearing the moose hide, and the second is that gathering that originally came from 20 people. Last year, we had 80,000 people attend Moose Hide Campaign Day. This year, we've surpassed 350,000 Canadians that will be joining us on May 12th. And if you haven't fasted before, and if you don't know the purpose or the intentions and the principles behind fasting, we do have knowledge keepers and folks who share about the fasting experience on the day. We also have a frequently asked questions on our website about how you can join us and fast safely and feel comfortable. But really, it's just about giving a little bit of yourself and your energy as a way of setting down your intentions and your commitments. And probably around breakfast time or noon, you'll start to feel very hungry and very parched. We start the fast at sunrise and we close the fast at sunset. And so, no food or water for one day from sunrise to sunset. And you really just think about all of those things that you're grateful for, the food and the water. But it really does make you reflect on the people and the things in your life that you're deeply grateful for and want to be able to make those commitments to. And so we have the day. As I said, the Honorable Marie Sinclair will be offering a keynote address alongside our co-founders, Raven and Paul. Raven will be emerging from her maternity leave to share some words and to really speak to her first child, the campaign. And it's something, it truly is a pleasure to be able to witness what they co-create and the stories that they tell. So I want to offer a personal invitation for everyone to join us on Moose Hide Campaign Day for those conversations. There are workshops throughout the afternoon. I believe there are like 7 or 8 workshops, and they're led by like thought leaders and medicine people. And we close the day with a berry ceremony. So you have a handful of berries and a little bit of water, and you break your fast with those berries. And we do that all collectively at sunset here on the west coast of Turtle Island. And that's something that you can rely on every year in the springtime. You can always come to us, and we'll be hosting our fast every single spring. So if you haven't fasted before and you're curious and you'd like to, or if you have before, regardless of if you're Indigenous, there are many, many, many cultures and people around the world who fast for the same intention. We would invite you to consider joining us. And if you don't want to fast, then it's totally valid to join for every single component of the day other than the fast. It's something that you would have to choose for yourself.
So we don't have a question, but we have a comment. A colleague said, no question, just really wanted to say thank you, Sage, for sharing. Very powerful to hear the story of the campaign, and what an amazing accomplishment to give the 3 millionth pin.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. It honestly, I will also share with your team the link from the interview that we did on APTN in Winnipeg. It was the day that we gifted his honor, and there was a 10-minute segment of an hour-long special on gender-based violence that focuses on men's organizations, and how the week previous discussed women's organizations. And so the week that we joined discussed the various theories of change that men's organizations bring forward. And so I would love if you could share and have folks tune in and hear a little bit about our work on APTN.
For sure.
And
There's
Akeisha,
another. Oh, go ahead.
did get another question.
Go ahead, Jill.
2 questions. So Sage, from one of our colleagues as well. I'll break them up into 2 of them. Does your amazing family get funding support, and how can support be sent?
So the way that it's a nonprofit organization. So the way that our nonprofit is structured is we are supported through various community grants, mostly public grants through the federal and provincial governments. One thing that we've always committed to is giving away the moose hide pins for free. Even though they do come at a cost, and they're ethically sourced as a result of moose in like auto collisions or trains. And so they're collected by a tannery, and we're able to harvest the hide that way. And for folks who don't want to wear moose hide, we have vegan pins or synthetic leather pins that folks can wear if they're not comfortable wearing the hide. But we've always made that commitment to offer them for free. And we've had a lot of folks say, well, you've given me these 100 pieces of moose hide. Like this is truly land medicine, and I feel I want to donate. And so we do have a donate page on the moosehidecampaign.ca website. If there's an organization or a charity event that you'd like to donate to, we are a charity, and so those contributions can be made there. But really, the biggest contribution folks can make is to order the pin and wear them, and to register for Moose Hide Campaign Day on May 12th, and hopefully I'll see them then. And feel free to reach out to me if you come on the day. I'll totally be there. And if anybody here, I know Jill, you said you know someone from Victoria. If you know folks in Victoria, we have a walk to end violence here in Victoria at Wawaditla, the Mungo Martin Big House, and we walk to the totem pole that's at the legislature. And this isn't a march, or it's totally nonpartisan. This is just something that we do, and it's a walk of ceremony to end violence. So if there's any folks in the Victoria area on May 12th, then please join us, and you'll be able to see myself and the Moose Hide Campaign family and community in person.
It is so beautiful to hear. I love the idea of a walk together to build community. It's very beautiful. Sage, I don't have any new questions. I think perhaps folks might get in touch with you directly. We will send out, I have everyone's email here, so I can definitely send out your specific contact information. We have some more information at the end of our slides here as well. So I think I'm going to say a huge thank you to you for that beautiful keynote speech. We appreciate your sharing your story and the story of the Moose Hide Campaign so much. Jill, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yes, Miigwech, Sage, thank you so much for coming to speak to our community today about all the important work that you folks are doing. And I love the idea of our community being able to support back, because this is such an important initiative to bring light to. So thank you. And one thing I'll definitely, I actually jotted it down right here, is I love when you spoke about the love ethic. That to me it was very impactful. So thank you for sharing that tidbit with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. The love ethic I originally learned, I took gender and Indigenous studies at the University of Victoria, and it came from a bell hooks reading, a book called All About Love. And I highly recommend to everyone in the room. This book changed my life. But she does refer often to the love ethic, which has guided me, especially throughout COVID, when there's such a sense of lovelessness in our society, and just looking for that love ethic in the few people that we have to cherish. So All About Love, bell hooks, is my piece of homework for everyone to go read.